presented its case about glaring anomalies in the verification report and demanded another verification to determine the taxable status of Kenyan-made confectionery. And basically that's sweets for you. And also we are told Kiswahili on agenda as Botswana's Masisi visits Dar es Salaam. We do know a few months ago they did decide that they're going to be teaching Swahili in that country. And Botswana's President Mokwetsi Masisi is expected in Dar es Salaam for a 2-day visit on Thursday. That, of course, will be a developing story. And Uhuru urges others to open up market for M-Pesa. Entry into Ethiopia presents a significant growth opportunity for Safaricom, and of course, as they make inroads into that country, communication shall be made easier. It is a large untapped market that, of course, this entry is celebrated to the point that the president visited that country. Now, Trump hails Buhari for burning Twitter, and also Museveni names new VP in cabinet reshuffle. Let's move on to the Citizen. This is a publication from Tanzania. Vodacom boss on why tax and data price reforms are necessary. The Citizen managing editor, Mr. Mpoki Thomas, recently held an exclusive interview with Vodacom Tanzania Chief Executive Hisham Hendi to talk about the telecom company's financial situation. And they're also giving us a tally of the coronavirus infections. We also told even in death, televangelist TB Joshua remains controversial. Temi Tope Balogun Joshua, commonly known as TB Joshua, said that when he was born in June 12, 1963, his mother had carried him in her womb for 15 months. Okay, let's move on. The government releases 376 billion shillings for Mwanza Isaka SGR, and there's more on President Samia Suluhu's appointment of new director of presidential communications, and of course that visit that is expected to Tanzania by Botswana and President Masisi. Take a look at that and learn more. Then in Rwanda, we have the Rwandan Today. Let's see what that is about this morning. That story on Kenyan confectionery industry is making headlines, and Tanzania presented its case about the glaring anomalies in that. And also, down here we're told, cry beloved Rubavu. People are leaving as shops are closed. About 384 of the houses were completely ruined, and 170 residents have been provided with tents or renting support. And in Nigeria, that common denominator, Twitter and presidents, is making headlines. Nigerian president has been praised by Donald Trump because he pitched a fit and banned Twitter from that country. Then we're told UN condemns Burkina Faso attack. Attack is one of the deadliest since jihadist violence began growing in Burkina Faso in 2015. And also Museveni names new VP in cabinet reshuffle. Let's take a look at what the CNN is giving us on its world page. And we are told here, Serbian volleyball player suspended after making anti-Asian racist gesture during march against Thailand. And we don't know that there has been an upsurge in, anti-Asia rhetoric and attacks against Asian people since the coronavirus, swept through the world. And of course, this is something that, of course, cannot be accepted in terms of professionalism in the athletic industry. And then Netanyahu is failing, but not exactly the way Trump did. And then U.S. donated 500 million COVID-19 vaccine doses worldwide. Watch sinkhole swallow up parked cars in Jerusalem. This has been making its rounds across the internet. And Russian court declares Navalny group extremist ahead of election. And we do know that that country does not smile on opposition. And of course, that is what's making headlines on the world page of the CNN. Take a look at that and find out what's making headlines in the Middle East, in Africa, as well as Europe. But okay. All right. right now, and to take a look at what's making headlines, of course, that what you've just seen, of course, speaks volumes. It's all about the budget today, and that is also what's being covered in our locals in the Standard and the Daily Nation. The front page of the Standard tells us eyes on Yatani and his magic briefcase. Treasury CS has a delicate balance act. He must find a way to settle the country's ballooning debt without increasing taxes, as well as take care of rising wages, pensions, and counties' expenditure. The front page of the Daily Nation tells us Yatani headache. Now, it's a tough balancing act for Treasury CS Ukur Yatani as he tries to raise hopes of a nation seeking relief from the economic shock of COVID-19 and amid a gaping revenue shortfall. His most pressing priorities include finding money from the thin resource envelope for President Kenyatta's Big Four agenda and legacy projects, borrowing at least 930 billion shillings to plug the budget deficit and delivering on the promises made to the IMF. And they have a splash on that across page 10 and page 11. Now, joining me here in studio to take a look at these and many other stories are Sakwa Bunyasi, who's the Member of Parliament for Nambale. We have George Kithi, who's a lawyer, as well as Churchill Sauke, who's a political analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for making the time to join us this morning. All right, let's start off with the Standard this morning, and we're going to take a look at the other stories that are making headlines before we get into all the stories on the budget. And the front page, the biggest, the story that has been given priority by the Standard, and of course even the manner in which it's presented on the front page, has to do with Maraga. We are on the road to anarchy, and that has to do with an interview that he gave yesterday. Now, it's the role of Parliament to take steps to remove him. That is the President he's talking about. If he violates the Constitution, if these acts are allowed to continue, we are descending into a banana republic. And he also quoted here, he said, if we continue to operate like this, we would not have the judiciary. Judges will be making decisions based on what the executive wants. He has also said, when a situation gets bad, people need to be frank and bold, because if we allow him, that is the President, to continue, it will bring more problems. Now, I'll start with George Kithi. You're a lawyer, and I do believe you'd be best on this panel to actually weigh in on this particular story. What do you make of what came out through the eyes, or rather how David Maraga actually sees the situation with the judiciary and the executive?
Thank you. There seems to be attacks on the President.
Mm-hmm. Seems, or these are actual?
There seems. I'll say seems for a reason.
Yes.
They are organized in the sense that they come from voices that have led, first and foremost, the helm of judiciary. The reason for these attacks are because the President, in the first instance, seems to be intolerant or is exasperated by decisions of courts, and publicly pronounces himself in that disappointment.
Yes.
The second is he has a friction with judiciary in the sense that he then does not comply or has not complied with orders of court. Now, those two issues are important. One is because judiciary has an oversight role on executive as an arm of government.
Yes.
And therefore, because the checks on executive, it continues to rely on executive, and the friction remains a constant now and for the foreseeable future. We do not see a situation where there'll be no judiciary and there'll be no executive. Now, it is beholden upon whoever leads the executive to respect the courts and obey court orders. When the President does not obey court orders, immediately while in office, he cannot be attacked from a criminal point of view and from a civil point of view, meaning he can't be taken to court and get arrested. Remember, he is at the helm and therefore leads the police and the military and all tools of violence.
Right. Now,
what happens is the pronouncements are out of frustration. Now, it is frustrating because constantly the regime that we have has been accused of not obeying court orders, but does obey court orders when it fits. It is so because the appointment of those judges is not negotiable.
Okay.
The appointment of those judges is a ceremony that takes the institution of judiciary and the persons appointed in those positions to a certain position of legitimacy in society to conduct the work that they do. They are judges. And therefore the ceremony is that they are sworn in the presence of the president, presided over by president, in a certain fashion designed by law. That gives that position a certain legitimacy and authority and power in society to discharge the responsibilities that it should.
Yes.
And therefore, when the Constitution was designed, it was designed more giving the president a ceremonial role and not an active role in the appointment of judges.
Right.
When then he descends into the arena of appointment and makes decisions to pick or not to pick, that is not the intention of law.
I'm going to pose to you a
Yes.
question that has been, I'm sure many have asked. Is the president just a rubber stamp then in this whole
Yes,
scenario?
he is a rubber stamp. There are certain things the president has to do because it is ceremonial for him to do that. Preside over a function because it is a ceremony. That function is designed to have a presidential ceremony in the sense that the office is elevated to a certain position in society.
Okay.
It is true, and it is that the conjecture of the Constitution. The president is a mere rubber stamp. He conducts that ceremony merely out of the context of the office that he's supposed to preside over. And therefore, to say that you can descend into the arena of selection and bias as to who you want or who you don't want for certain reasons that probably it's information you have is not available for whoever holds the office, for the reason that those that are appointed as into the Judicial Service Commission tasked with the appointment of these judges must go through certain procedures that will then bring the judges into the repute and into the offices as designed by law. Remember, why we suffered in the last constitution and regime, especially during the Moi regime, judges were appointed politically,
Yes.
Judges were being proposed by ministers, members of parliament, judges were being supervised by judiciary, and we had a country as we had it then. If you want us to go to the country that we had it then this is where we're heading to, that the president has a hand in the appointment of judges. The judges have to be free. They have to be free because they're appointed, they have to be independent because they're appointed by an independent commission, and therefore whoever wants to be checked by judiciary cannot then appoint the checker.
Okay. Now, Honorable Sakwa Bunyasi, the headlines, or rather the titles given to some of these articles are really charged this morning. We're having Maraga, we are on the road to anarchy. That's what he said. When you look at page 4 and 5, Maraga, Kenya is fast sliding into anarchy. Then another one says, this is public lynching of judges left out. Former CJ tells the president. Do you think this language is justified? Is the situation that dire? Where do you stand on all this?
I think the situation is dire, and I think every situation deserves words that can describe it accurately so that people, as people exchange ideas, they have some notion of the depth of the problem. I think it is really important. There is no individual, irrespective of the public position given, that should disobey the law. Because if you do, you're leading the way for a widespread disobedience of the law, which then borders on the use of words, on the words used like anarchy, for example. Lynching is when you're out to sort of attack in ways that are perhaps not even fair. And I think all of these we have experienced. Sometimes the situation in Kenya is stranger than fiction itself. I really think that to bring us back to near normalcy, even if there is quiet resistance to decisions of the court, you can't allow your citizen number one, the head of state, to be the one that disobeys that arm of government that really protects the vast majority of the population. And when it slides out of control, normally even a person in that position cannot bring it back. It does not matter how much control you have over the legal use of force. It does not bring it back if every citizen is one way or another disobeying the rule of law. I really think that the president should rethink. I don't think he should peg his reputation or ego or legacy in any way, shape and form on decisions of the type that are in the judiciary. And I think the singular focus on undermining the judiciary is unfortunate for Kenya. Otherwise, Kenya was emerging as a respected lower middle country among the developing nations. But with these kinds of things, they set us back. They don't take us at the front. And we don't want to become dictators like some of our neighbors. It doesn't help them.
Okay. Now, Mr. Saoke, when you look at this article, what comes to mind? And we, of course, cannot deny, because it's in the public domain, the fact that the president has said he has misgivings about the judges he left out. So in the wake of those misgivings, and we have just been told that he is a rubber stamp, how would you like to see the president address this other than leaving these judges out of the fold?
I think there are much more administrative mechanisms upon which the president could be able to engage the judges in view of some of the misgivings he has of the judiciary, other than just creating a public spot that is unconstitutional.
Okay.
And I think that these are some of the reasons why the Constitution was even wise enough to have the chief advisor of government being part of the Judicial Service Commission. So there's need to look for better mechanisms of engagement between the executive and the judiciary, because the direction in which they are going is still going to be more. In fact, it's still going to hurt the Constitution more, because in as much as we are trying to look at ways of removing out the judges that are apparently considered to be rogue, on the public domain, people are saying something negative, which is actually denting the image of the president.
Yes.
And politically has an impact. The other thing is that, you know, the whole question of launching the judiciary in public, it's also intimidating the judiciary, and that also has a political impact on the presidency, because you see, people will still see him as, you know, the president who ensured that the judiciary was curtailed and the independence of the judiciary was curtailed, and those are legacies that will not be very good for him.
Okay. Now we're going to take this story, or that was on this interview, and the sentiments of former CJ David Maraga, and then I'll get the sentiments of our panelists on whether or not he is justified in suggesting that the president needs to be impeached. Now, immediate former Chief Justice David Maraga is warning that the country risks sliding into anarchy if President Uhuru Kenyatta and his administration continue to violate the Constitution and disregard court orders. In a hard-hitting statement targeting President Kenyatta, Maraga said failure by the president to gazette 6 judges nominated by Judicial Service Commission was tantamount to public lynching and condemning the judicial officers unheard. Speaking during an exclusive interview with KTN News yesterday, the former Chief Justice said he will remember President Kenyatta as a head of state who had no regard for the law. Duncan Haemba reports.
A day after his predecessor, Dr. Willy Mutunga, threw punches from his red corner, it was the turn of immediate former Chief Justice David Maraga to throw harder punches, targeting the president over what he termed gross violation of the Constitution. He warned that the country is treading on dangerous and slippery grounds.
This impunity, and particularly disobedience of the court orders, is going to grind this country if we don't take care. You cannot apply the law selectively. When you do that, you send the country into anarchy.
Maraga faulting the president over his refusal to gazette the remaining JSC-appointed judges and magistrates despite court orders, saying the move is detrimental to careers of the concerned judges.
Swear these judges in, lodge a complaint before the Judicial Service Commission. And whoever has been appointed, whether he was an advocate before or he was a judge before, he will be removed. If we don't follow that process, you know now what has happened is that these judges have been condemned and hard. Because now, I mean, in the eyes of the public, these are the corrupt judges who the president was talking about. That is the message out there.
A seemingly fed-up former CJ maintaining the president's role is ceremonial and he should not interfere with the independence of other constitutional organs.
If the president, I mean the Chief Justice, there is no presidential petition. The ceremony has been organized for the swearing of the president, and the Chief Justice refuses to come and swear the president. I can assure you, hell will, I mean, the whole country will roll. They will come and say, remove this fellow. He doesn't even know what he's supposed to do. That is what's supposed to happen with the president.
Maraga is also reading mischief over the president's list of judges and magistrates who are said to have integrity issues.
Those who are said to have issues, and some have been added now to that, I mean, to that list, and others have been removed from that list. For the good of the persons concerned, yes. I won't name them. But that's what has happened.
He says if the trend continues, the judiciary will soon be held captive by the executive.
Wacha nikwambie, hii kitu ikiendelea na iende mpaka mwisho. We can go on pole mwishowe, we will not have a judiciary.
That is your fear?
That is my fear. We will not have a judiciary. The judges will be there. Kesi ikikuja kotini, judge anaangalia anasema, hii kesi nikikata namna hii, raisi au waziri fulani atasema nini? Wacha nione vile nafanya namna hii. Is that the country you want us to live in?
Also targeted for attack were MPs who Maraga accused of failing to impeach the president.
It is the duty of parliament, when the president has violated the constitution, to take steps and remove him.
To impeach the president.
To impeach the president. That is the only way you can have order. If this kind of act is allowed to continue, we are descending into a banana republic.
And just how will he remember President Uhuru Kenyatta?
I'm sorry to say that I will remember him as a president who had no regard for the law.
With the two former CJs heavily criticizing the president over his move, it remains to be seen whether Chief Justice Martha Koome will step forward and give a clear direction.
And promoting fairness,
Duncan Hemba, KTN News.
And integrity within it.
Right, hard-hitting indeed. And of course, we'll talk about whether or not he is justified in suggesting the president needs to be impeached. But I'd like to go on from that point where Duncan Haemba ended. When you compare the sentiments of former Chief Justice David Maraga in that report and exclusive interview, and what the current CJ, Martha Koome, said, do you think she's playing too safe? Mr. Kithi, could you compare and contrast those two, sentiments?
I think it's clear out there, and as lawyers, we face it this way, that as late as yesterday,
right.
Probably I won't give the fullest information, but we appeared before one of the judges who is a victim of what the president did. And I mean, as lawyers, we had to compromise on whether or not the judge should continue to hear us.
What do you mean compromise?
We had to have the discussion with the judge, because the judge brings this out, and the judges do bring this out as this is what has happened to us, this is where we are, and the discussion will be whether you have the confidence for me to proceed with the hearing today. And as lawyers, then we have to tell him we have no problem with you, we understand what is going on. Is that how we should conduct our cause? I think the message
just to pause you right there. If
yes.
a judge is approaching a case or deliberation in that manner, don't you think it has already affected?
It has. It has affected the judiciary, it has affected the judges, and you see, I'll explain this differently. Yes, the judges are already affected, but they're not the ones handling the case. I think the issue is the message that was sent, especially in the environment that's prevailing. We must examine the cases that are before the judiciary.
Right.
The BBI case is the one that's before the judiciary. For the executive, they must get it their way, and therefore intimidating the judges is a tactical approach to the case that's being had. Either way, they want the case to go their way, and therefore they have to intimidate the judges. Because as we speak, and I speak for myself because it's out of experience, the judges feel it, they bring it out for us, before us as lawyers, and also the litigants, our clients, and ask them whether within the prevailing environment they are comfortable that the judges continue with these cases. But let me read something here. Following the interview by the former Chief Justice, he said, and he was basically referring to the current Chief Justice, and he took a dig at her.
Yes.
He said, if allowed that, I would have violated the Constitution and given the President liberty to violate the Constitution and set a bad precedent. He would have gotten a free hand to choose. Now, the former Chief Justice refused that the President appoints part of those judges and leaves out some, meaning there was that opportunity that happened. Now, what happened will have happened before, but the Chief Justice then refused the appointment because he said you can't appoint part of them. You will appoint all of them because that is the law. And that was granted starting since 2019 up to now. The new Chief Justice, when she comes into office, overrides that former, the previous decision of her predecessor and allows the President first to change the list of the judges that were not going to be appointed. Those that were bad for appointment are now good for appointment. Those that were good for appointment are now bad for appointment. And the President proceeds to preside over a ceremony and appoints the judges in the manner that he chose to do, preside over, and of course, supported by a decision of the current Chief Justice, the new Chief Justice, into the constitutional problem we have. Let me put it this way. If the Chief Justice, the new Chief Justice, had not agreed to the appointment of these judges, just like her predecessor, then the pressure would have been more on the executive than it is now. So let's say this, by way of conclusion, is that the crisis we have now, the disquiet we have now, the criticism we have now is on the President, but rests more on the current Chief Justice. Because she allowed this ceremony to be presided over when in fact her predecessor had refused. So what is it that the predecessor saw and disagreed with the President and the ceremony did not take place? And what is it that now she agrees? It means she is weaker and we have a problem in the judiciary, because if this is what we'll continue to have as a constant, then she does not stand her ground, and there's an overriding power by executive that then can persuade her into submission. This is a submission of the new Chief Justice. The mess that is there is her creation. She should not have allowed this ceremony to take place if she was worth her salt.
Honorable Bunyasi, do you agree?
Well, first of all, in terms of the analysis and the span of thinking that Wakili has outlined, I have absolutely no difficulty with that. I agree entirely. What I see, though, is that this was her first item on the in-tray. And I guess she was trying to be nice. I do not know who it is during the interviews for CJ who said, instead of confrontation, I don't think it was this Chief Justice now, I would simply, I think, organize a cup of tea, I don't know with whom, and so on, which came up more like a joke than anything else. And I think being nice, the Chief Justice realized that being nice cannot be a solution to these kinds of things. She has to play her role as envisaged in the Constitution and other statutory provisions. If she tries to be nice to the President would seek perhaps to optimize or even maximize his advantage in whatever corner he is. That may not work in the interests of the CJ or even the country. It is these possible adversarial relationships that are envisaged in these instruments of law. That in fact you may have different positions and you hold the position in accordance with how your position is defined. If you begin to be nice to the other side, you disrupt things and then you can't get them back in line. I think that we can say, first of all, to start with, that none of these things are personal if we draw those kinds of boundaries. But what is true, though, is that the President has his corner, should play in his corner, should be bounded by the law. There is a reason why that was done. It's the same with the judiciary, it's the same with Parliament. I think Parliament, too, must come in a sharp focus in terms of their oversight role, in terms of their legislative role, whether they are playing the game in a way to please any of the other two in their own corners and so on. I think it's very important to get those checks and balances, as they say.
Yes, checks and balances. We having here the former CJ who is, let's call it, brave enough to call for an impeachment. Do you think those who are mandated with that role will be brave enough to carry it out? It's one thing for him to ask for that. Do we live in a country where that can actually happen if actually the reasons being put forward are warrant that move?
That me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. I think the call is bold, and I think the call is probably very appropriate in the circumstances.
Yes.
But we are in a system of very competitive party politics. Well, not very competitive, but of party politics. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And we just went through a phase of reassertion of the powers of parties over discipline for their members and how they must listen to the voice of their parties and their party leaders and so on. I can assure you that an attempt could be made, and it would be a good demonstration, but I don't think they would marshal the numbers now as things stand. And I think the reason lies also, I don't know if it was the immediate former or the second former Chief Justice,
yes.
who said that...
William Mutunga.
Yes, I think it was William Mutunga, who essentially said that the president is crossing lines. But I think, no, sorry, it was Maraga, who did not think that Parliament was playing its role to be able to stand up, for example, even that impeachment kind of, even to contemplate it. There are many people in Parliament who would probably freeze at that thought. But as an institution, it would be difficult to marshal numbers where we are now because of the intimidation, let me call it that, or the very robust application of the discipline principle that the party, particularly Jubilee Party, has been applying. But you never know. Things could turn. But I think that what Parliament must do is that if there is a serious breach, and if one of the envisaged responses is an impeachment,
yes.
it ought to be tried, it ought to be brought up.
Okay.
You never know. People may sign on progressively and you get the numbers.
Yes.
That is not, again, not even a personal thing. That is to put the person of the president in his corner, because that's where he's supposed to play, and not sort of crossover. You don't play rugby in a soccer game.
That is another reality that, of course, everyone has to face, because there's what the judicial chiefs are saying, and then there's the reality on the ground. And I'd like also, speaking of reality on the ground, on the other side of this break, we'll get the sentiments of Churchill, so okay, on how this is impacting judges, because the